there. This is Kelsey Gibson with Greenbelt Realty, and I am here today interviewing an expert. This is David Carpenter with Property Taxes Suck. Yes, they do. They suck a lot.
They really do.
So, David, you're from here, and you primarily serve people in the Comal and Guadalupe counties. Tell me how you got into protesting property taxes.
Sort of a long story into getting on this side of the property tax table. I actually worked within the Guadalupe Appraisal District for over 6 years and learned very quickly how to value properties for taxation purposes. But ultimately determined that I wasn't able to help people like I wanted to inside the system. And so I left after about 6 years and started my own agency last year, where I can actually help my clients benefit from the knowledge and experience that I have on how to lower those property taxes.
That is awesome. So you have an insider's view at how the tax assessor goes about assessing properties, how they determine that value. So when you go in, you can speak to them as essentially one of their own or someone who the lingo.
Yeah, absolutely. I was actually one of a handful of people inside the system that was making the value adjustments, creating the models that were determining the values that were going to be taxed. And it's a complex system. It's not a straightforward, easy, one-step process. It's a long process, and I was critical to that process from the very beginning all the way to the very end.
Oh, interesting. So when you go in and you bring a proposal for a specific property, so someone hires you, you go in and you have their best interests in mind, you bring data to show the appraisal district. So when you do that, you're focusing on certain metrics.
Correct.
You kind of need to be changed to give them the best and the most long-term outcome.
Absolutely. I do a deep analysis on every single property that I protest to see if there's errors on the account, if there are comparables that justify a reduced value, if there are other properties that are being unfairly assessed compared to your value. And so I look at that on every single property, and I don't just throw numbers in a grid and hope for the best. I'm actually trying to manipulate the value in a way that I know benefits that property specifically.
That makes so much sense. Well, and something that I appreciate when we met was just that you are local. I know I had my property taxes protested by a big company for several years, and to varying degrees of success. And what I realized was that company didn't know my house. They didn't know Comal County, Guadalupe County. They were a big company. And so there was no way they were going to be as detailed with my home protest as they needed to be to get the results. So when I met David, I was like, this sounds like the perfect solution for people because obviously in Texas, property taxes are a huge part of our monthly payment. And the more you can lower those, the better. When people buy a house, I tell them your mortgage is set if you have a fixed rate. But one thing that can go up and down is definitely your property taxes. And we've seen that over the last few years. We've seen a huge increase in some areas. And so now is the time to protest. So tell me, why should people take the time and invest their time and energy and finances to protest their property taxes?
I think ultimately the number one reason is to, if you don't protest your property taxes, you won't save any money. You are going to pay what the appraisal district says your value is if you don't protest. If you do protest, you have the opportunity to dispute that value, which ultimately lowers your property taxes. That's the bottom line to it all. But if we get into the nuances of the property tax system, there are errors in more accounts than you'd ever imagine there would be. There are highs and lows because of the fact that the appraisal district is using a mass appraisal model. They're not looking at your house or your apartment complex or your medical office individually and saying that's what your house is worth. They're using averages and medians and large analytical tools to determine that value. In using averages, you're going to have people that are naturally high.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to have some that are low, but you're going to have the way that the system is kind of skewed, you're going to have more on the high side. And without disputing those people that are on the high side of the average are going to pay more than their fair share of property taxes. So it's very important to protest, in my opinion, every single year, regardless of your opinion on that value being correct or not correct.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That makes so much sense. And really, in the big scheme of things, you're only paying out a portion of what you are saving. So you're typically, you're going to be saving money a lot more than what you're investing to protest your property taxes,
Correct.
which is awesome. So to me, it's a great investment. It's a great option. And especially if you don't feel confident, which a lot of us do not feel confident going into that appraisal district. So say someone wants to go in and do this for the first time, what should they do?
Yeah. Protesting the appraised value of your home is a right in Texas.
Okay.
You have the ability as an individual to dispute the value that the appraisal district gets you. Some ways of doing that is to look at the homes that have sold around you on regular, within the past year. Those are definitely the most important comparable properties. If there's not a lot of sales comparables within the last year, you can potentially expand that search to a little bit further out, but typically look within the past year to find similar homes that have sold, not just all the homes that have sold. If you are looking at every single home that sold in your neighborhood and presenting that to the appraisal district, that's actually a negative because those may or may not benefit you in value.
And is it true that they can essentially now use those comps against other people?
They can use those comps now that they have the information. Because Texas is a non-disclosure state, the appraisal district doesn't always have all of the sales information. But whenever we go into protest, and if we're providing information to them, they can now use that information to justify or to compare your property to higher valued sales. And so it's not always beneficial to provide everything to them.
Okay.
Whenever I protest, I provide only the sales that I feel justify a lower value than what they're currently appraising the value of the property. Not only do I look at sales comparables, but I also look at the surrounding properties. Because in the state of Texas, we not only do we have the right to dispute the properties, but we also have the right to be treated fairly and equally compared to our neighbors. And so if we find that our neighbors are being lower valued in comparison to us, or they have certain unequal treatment applied to their property that is similar to your property, but you're not benefiting from that adjustment, then we have the right to bring that up. And in my circle, in the property tax circle, we call it equity. It's not how much value do you have in your house. It's, are you being treated equally compared to everybody else?
Right.
So it's important to not only look at the sales, but also look at your fair and equal value compared to your neighbors. So those are the two biggest things. And when you go to the appraisal district, they're going to present you with a sales grid and an equity grid.
Yes.
But it's important to understand what those numbers are meaning and how to make those work for you.
Right. Yes. I remember when I went and protested my property taxes, I thought I was pretty prepared. And then they brought up, you go into a room, you've got a couple people there, and it was the formal one. And they had a PowerPoint. They were more prepared than I was. Obviously, that's their job. We were able to have a conversation, but I felt the whole time like I was catching up and trying to learn their lingo. So I can definitely see how, you have that understanding already. You guys are starting off at not at 0.0 like I was, and you're able to be really effective. And I guess that makes sense too, why you should always protest your property taxes, because then you're also keeping it down for your neighbors. When your neighbors go to protest, they can use that equity approach like you talked about, and they can say, hey, my neighbor's been protesting every year, and theirs is actually accurate, and that actually can help them later on. So it's a good neighborly thing to do. So why should you hire someone local to protest your property taxes? Why should you hire someone in general? I mean, you can call me, I can send you some comps, you can go into the appraisal district and have at it.
I named my company propertytaxes.io because the property tax system is very complicated and convoluted and hard to understand for the average person. It's not that I disagree with what our property taxes are used for, because I definitely understand that property taxes need to be collected in order to pay for the infrastructure and the things that we benefit from in our community. Why I do what I do is because I was approached from the inside of the appraisal district. I was approached by many, many property owners who just didn't understand.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't understand what they were doing. They didn't understand how to justify a reduction. And they wanted to, they needed to save money
Mm-hmm.
for their family finances,
Mm-hmm.
but they didn't understand how these values were derived and what they could do in order to reduce that liability.
Mm-hmm.
So I created my company in order to be that helping hand for the community and the people that I knew and could trust me to ultimately go into this foreboding situation,
Right.
something that they didn't understand. And with my knowledge and experience, I've been in hundreds of hearings, I've been in thousands of conversations with appraisers, and I know their language. I know what they're looking for whenever they're looking for comparable properties. I also know what characteristics of a house actually change value.
Mm-hmm.
And so I can point those out because I look at each property individually. A lot of clients that I've talked to that protest their property on their own, they oftentimes protest it 1 year and then they'll forget about it next year.
Yeah.
Or they'll protest it this year, and whenever they get their value notice next year, they don't realize the deadline is May 15th. And
Right.
so once that deadline passes, it's exponentially harder to get a protest successful through the appraisal district. So I guarantee to my clients that I will protest your property every single year on time, and I won't miss any deadlines, and I will go through it in an educated way, in an understanding how to actually lower those values if possible. I was sitting through a meeting with the appraisal district chief appraiser, the tax assessor collector, and the appraisal district taxpayer liaison, who's kind of like a middleman between the appraisal district and the property owners.
Mm-hmm.
And all three of them agreed that it's very important to protest your taxes every year. You can do it yourself, or you can hire a professional to help you with it. But they all three also agreed that hiring the firm that has the most venture capital funds to generate the most marketing budget isn't always your best situation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm actually from New Braunfels. I grew up here, went to high school here, raising my family, operating multiple businesses in New Braunfels. My focus is Guadalupe and Comal County, and everything I do is to support this area and the property owners from my hometown, ultimately reduce the property tax liability.
That is awesome. I love that one. I'm a New Braunfels girl too. So where'd you go to school?
I went to Canyon High School.
Okay. I would have been.
But my wife went to New Braunfels.
Okay. There you go.
We're,
yeah.
We're all over.
Yeah. I'm, would have graduated from New Braunfels, and my kids, are in Canyon. So yeah. Equal opportunity. Well, thank you so much, David. That makes a lot of sense. And thank you guys. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to either one of us. And if you want to connect with David, I'll put his info below, and have a great day. Thanks.